So we've been trying to learn as much as we can about this defendant because so many people are trying to learn exactly who he really was. And we're pleased now to be joined by Sharlene Spingler, who is, among other things, a writer, accomplished writer, had worked in the finance world before that. And she had met Christian Gerhardt's writer, not under that name, some time back. And Sharlene, thanks for joining us. And again, it's very helpful for us to talk to some people who have had contact with him. So I guess the first question for you is, where and how did you first meet him?
Well, I had just moved into Tudor City with two large dogs, and I had walked downstairs within 45 minutes, and suddenly this diminutive blonde man ran across the street, jumped in front of me, introduced himself as Clark, said he loved my English setter, he'd do anything, he'd walk my dog. And I was a little taken aback by the forwardness of it.
Yeah, I can understand, I think, probably anybody in New York who has that sort of an introduction to a person would be taken back by it. But did you continue then to come in contact with him after that first meeting?
Well, it was the neighborhood, and he had an office in one of the buildings there, so he had a Gordon setter, and we would frequently walk our dogs together.
Yeah. When you first started doing this and walking the dogs with him, what was your reaction to him just basically as a person?
Rather brittle, stiff. I found his accent to be somewhat ridiculous, but that was Clark. Then again, he didn't tell me his last name for about 2 years.
So it was 2 years before he ever used the name Rockefeller with you?
Correct.
When he told you Rockefeller, did he in some way either completely overtly or in some insinuative fashion say to you of course, the Rockefellers?
It was implied.
Yeah.
And he would make statements about, well, we lost the center when it was sold to the Japanese, or he would make statements about taking his friends up to Pocantico Hills to run the dogs. And I really didn't care because I knew him well for 5 years. It was casual. He certainly wasn't enhancing my life financially or socially, and I was busy, so I didn't really take him too seriously.
But you actually, as a result of this relationship, you actually kind of helped him out a little bit, did you not, in terms of introductions to clubs and people?
Certainly. I invited him to 2 occasions that I did at the Harvard Club. I invited him to 3 art shows that I curated at Carnegie Hall. And I introduced him to a very prominent conceptual artist, and this was classic. Clark said to him, "I'm thinking of building a museum in a quarry in New Hampshire, and I'd be honored if you would do the Reinhardt room." So my friend looked at him and he said, "Well, Clark, I'd be thrilled. We'll call it the Reinhardt Vault."
It's funny you use the accent because I don't know if you saw this, but one of the witnesses in the trial actually described, and going back to the Gilligan's Island show of decades ago, referred to him as speaking similar to Thurston Howell III, if you remember I guess it was the Jim Backus character, if I remember correctly, with the clenched jaw and the affectation. Is that a pretty fair characterization of him?
Well, I see from the interview that he did on NBC in September that 12 more years of wearing this mask, his face had twisted, and he was almost speaking as though he had a stroke. And I thought, well, that's 12 more years of wearing the character.
How did you first then discover, Sharlene, that he was not who he pretended to be?
This was in August of 2008 when he had gone on the lam with the child, and it was a manhunt. And when it came out in the Boston papers that they had no ID, he had no Social Security, nothing to identify who he was, and people in Cornish, New Hampshire were saying, "I've heard him speak with a foreign accent." So I called my one friend who's fluent in these areas, who is the actor Steven Seagal, and I said, "Steven, how could this man be such a ghost?" And he said, "Well, depending upon who he wanted to build himself up to be, if you start early, it is actually easy." To which I said, "Oh, no, you're telling me this is a pathology?" He said, "Definitely, and it's rather thick." He said, definitely, and don't be surprised if you find out he's a serial murderer.
So last question for you. Given your contacts with him and the interactions that you witnessed with him, are you at all surprised to find out how many people he had actually conned for so long a period of time?
No, I look at it as he's now turned into a rather evil clown that is slip-sliding into 30 years of grease paint, and unfortunately for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it's been a rather expensive joke, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has indeed. Sharlene Spingler, Sharlene, thanks so much for offering your reflections on your contacts with him. As we said, it helps, I think, for us to understand him a lot better than we have in the past. Thanks for spending the time with us.
My pleasure.
You take care. Sharlene Spingler, as we said, had met him some decades ago.